All right. How's it going, everybody? Got some people showing up here. Nice. All right. It's 9:32. I guess we'll just get started here. Apologize for a little bit of my tardiness here. Hopefully you guys can see the screen. There's a little bit of SharePoint or sharing issues with PowerPoint, but well, welcome. My name's Anthony McMillan. I'm the COO and head of cybersecurity here at Velox Systems. And kind of looking at all of the things with our clients and taking care of. That's my day-to-day job is keep everyone safe, and kind of do the in charge of training, in charge of uh, implementation and stuff like that, as well as just keeping our regular service desk up to date and moving, get your guys' tickets and stuff taken care of. And so allows me to see a lot of what goes on behind the scenes in the day-to-day life. And so it's not just textbook stuff that I deal with, but actual real life cybersecurity scenarios. And so yeah, thank you for joining today. We are looking at attack surface management. And for a lot of people, this is probably a term like you're familiar with what these words are, but you don't know exactly what this whole thing means. And so attack surface management really is, in layman's terms, it's just that it's looking at the entire surface of your company, all of the different ways that your company has exposure, not only internally but externally, and finding ways that it can be compromised, things that are risky, that can compromise the integrity of your data, of your information, of your reputation, things that are along those lines. A lot of times we think of that in regards to just external, right? How can people harm your business? But there's a lot of other factors with that. There's the internal factors, and there's also factors that are outside your control. So today, my hope is to kind of walk you guys through a very high level view of what attack surface management is, give you some pointers on how to protect that, and hopefully to continue that conversation going forward of trying to identify the things that can harm your business and ways that you can proactively keep that side of your business safe. So let's start really with again another definition. So what is it, right? And this is a very high level definition. So if you guys have questions afterwards, I look forward to hearing those. But it's a continuous process of discovering, of analyzing, and mitigating vulnerabilities across all assets that attackers could exploit. And that's the key thing there, right? It is a continuous process in our ever changing landscape of technology and the way you do business. It's you have to reassess every time. What new risks are you inheriting? What new risks are you exposing yourself to? And maybe what risks you've gotten rid of, because as your technology has changed, as your business has changed, what are things that you no longer have to really think about, right? And assets is another big thing there, right? What are your assets? That's anything that is valuable to your company, anything that has a value in contributing to your company. That's people, that's hardware, that's data information, that's money, all of those things, right? And the big thing here is for every length of your business that you step out for and that you do more stuff on, you add another surface area for someone to come at you to try and go after your business. And so the effort here is minimizing this as much as possible. Now, the truth being is there's no way to completely get rid of your attack surface. You just have to shut your doors and no longer be a business. Here, you were just trying to minimize the weaknesses, or the exposure level of each of these surfaces. Ultimately, it's all of these varying things that have led to some of the biggest data breaches and cyber attacks that we've seen in history over the last 10 years with a lot of companies. And I've got a couple of those that I'm going to share with you guys today. And so, kind of a real world example of this. I know this is not really technology related, but something that's easy for people to understand is an attack surface would be like your front door, right? And a weakness in that is leaving your front door open when you leave, right? So none of us today would, when you left for work today, or you got in your car and you drove to the office, did you open your front door, go get in your car, and then you just left that front door wide open? Right, for all of your neighbors to see, all the people walking their dogs by your house to see that it's open. But you took the mitigated risk and you said, no, I'm going to close that door and I'm going to, hopefully a lot of us, lock that door, right? And in that moment, in that process, right, you are managing that attack surface, right? Another IT technology kind of example of that would be actually just exposing passwords, right? Hopefully everyone here and is using a password manager. Everyone here is not using the same password for a lot of things, but that is a surface that people can use to leverage against your company. Once they learn who your identity is and learn what your email address is, if you're using the same password across all things, well, that's a place where they can attack all sides of your business, from your bank accounts to your local accounts to your email to pretty much everything else that's out there. And so our goal here, my goal here, is to help identify all those different services that are out there and then give you guys some tools so that we really can understand like how attackers are going after you guys. So let's talk about some components of an attack surface, right? So what makes up your ASM, your attack surface management, right? So we have external facing assets. So these are things that are internal to your company, things that are that you guys use, that everyone else in the world has some level of exposure to. Hopefully, that's not full exposure, like access to your server, but some minor exposure to it. So think of things like your websites. If you have vendors that you work with, you have APIs, ways that they integrate in, and that's a way for them to get inside of your system. Even email servers. The whole point of email is cross communication, right? It's to reach out to somebody else at another business in another part of the world and communicate with them. And so by having that level of exposure, there is to some degree a way back into your system. And we put up as many safeguards as possible for that, but it is something that we have to consider. There's internal facing assets. So this we mean things that you have inside of your system that are not meant to leave, right? Things that are only meant for how you operate and do business. These are your employee devices, cell phones, smart devices, your servers that are sitting internally, your workstations, your wireless network, right? If you are in manufacturing, those are all your CNC machines and your cutters and all this other stuff. If you're medical, right? These are your patient care machines. They're not supposed to be seen by anybody else. And so they're supposed to have a higher level of protection over them, but there's still things that can happen that can essentially break them, and so you have to keep them secure. Now, this is a kind of an industry term lately, and so some of you may have heard it. Some of you may have heard it, but never had it defined. But shadow IT. Really, this just it's a kind of a catch-all. Really, it means the unmanaged or unknown assets within your company. Some of the easiest ways to think about this is bring your own device is when it comes to your company. Many of us now work from home. Many of our businesses now have contracted employees where they can bring in their own systems because everything is cloud-based at this point, right? You log into Microsoft, you log into Google, you do all your work in there. But that brings with it a bunch of inherited risks because you don't necessarily know how those softwares are being used, right? How those cloud applications are being utilized. You don't know what kind of device is being used to access them, what kind of networks they're on. And these are all outside of the bandwidth of your normal IT management systems. And so by default, when you create a network or you create a company, it's an allow all, deny by exception, meaning that everything is permitted until you go through and you deny and block certain things within the system. And especially in a world of roaming technology now and work from home, that allows people to bring anything they have. And so one of the common things that I've seen happen is someone goes and works from home one day, or they work from, they get sick or whatever it is, and they're sitting on their home computer and they're working on their email, they're working on accessing documents and SharePoints. But this is a family computer. And maybe their child, who is an avid gamer or something like that, has downloaded something to the computer without the parent or the employee knowing, and that thing is sitting on the back end, reading, learning, understanding, and it's compromised that entire asset. And so, without it actually being under the management, and there's no restrictions on how and when and where this company information can be accessed, that shadow IT becomes now a bigger deal of how we address that as a business, and how we keep the unknown side of things as limited as possible. Third-party dependencies is another one that in the last 5 years has become a big know-how with this. This is essentially, we all have vendors. We all have people we work with. None of us build our own tools. None of us build our own software. We all rely on essentially the intelligence and the know-how of these other companies to build and provide us stuff. The biggest one, obviously, being Microsoft. We all rely on some type of email, but a lot of us use Microsoft for almost everything what we do in our business, from email communication, internal communication, sharing documents, things like that. And we depend on them heavily. If Microsoft goes down today, how much of the world would shut down? We saw that happen not too long ago with CrowdStrike. Um, but the problem with that is ultimately an attack surface for your business, because if something happens to that third party vendor, something happens to that supply chain, right? That infection or that malicious actor can then funnel all of their attacks through you. Unfortunately, right, there's not a lot of things that you can do outside of that. You can't really, I can't go in there and protect myself from Microsoft if Microsoft's the one getting compromised. But there are things that I can put in place for myself and for my business that can allow me to help identify when things go bad, or what to do in the event of a vendor or a supply chain system completely going down. If your shipping and receiving company that you use to send out all of your products one day has a cyber attack and they no longer can be used, how do you disconnect from their systems, and then how do you still operate as a business, right? These are all risk mitigating factors that you have to kind of analyze. And the last one's your physical location, your office building, your parking lots, your fence lots. Sometimes these are the most easy things that we try to think of, but they are things that we still need to think of. Are your doors being locked? Do you have cameras watching on all these things? Do you have important fenced in areas being monitored correctly, right? How are you protecting whatever assets you have in your building and in your possession to the best of your ability and your knowledge? So external, internal, the great unknown, the third parties that we really can't control, but we have to be aware of. And then again, your physical location, the things, the assets that you really kind of care for. So what are the common risks, right? So how do these things get compromised? How do these things get attacked, right? So the biggest one, which hopefully you have a good IT provider that takes care of these for you, but it's unpatched software and misconfigurations. Windows they send out monthly patches every Tuesday, and those get vetted for making sure that they're not going to break any systems, but they're paired with security patches, right? Things that people are constantly trying to break down within your operating system or within your firewall or whatever it is to try and get past your system. Patches come out regularly, and it's very important to make sure that they get applied appropriately and in the right time space to help prevent things. And there's whole catalogs out there that you can go through. And if I can find out what version of software you're using and if it's old and whatever it is, I can probably Google it and find out a vulnerability, and which will allow me to get in. That's the reason, for the most part, things get patched. Exposed credentials or sensitive data. Again, that kind of goes back to my earlier example. You got to be protective of your data, of your information. Can't use the same passwords over and over again. You really should be using a password manager nowadays. It's something that I heavily push personally and professionally with that information or sensitive data. We talked about websites and things that are external facing. You got to make sure that those things are sanitary, that they're cleaned off. There's certain risks that you can expose yourself to, even by listing out your clients, your vendors, the people you work with, because that allows people to, again, gain information about you that they can then try to use to manipulate or use against you. Making sure your file servers data is all locked down, no unauthorized access. Hopefully everyone here knows that if you're in SharePoint, you're in Google Drive, that you have external sharing turned off, or if you have it on, it's limited to some capacity that only certain people are allowed to share, and only certain data is allowed to be shared, right? You got to have data that's marked appropriately confidential versus low priority, right? Things that are okay to get out versus things that should never see the light of day, like maybe an HR payroll sheet. You don't want that getting out for employees or anything like that to see. Again, vulnerabilities, again, like we said, in supply chain vendors, we'll talk. I have got a pretty good example about that we'll get to here to explain that in more depth, but um, limited that we can do, but something we just got to be aware of. And then this is the big one, increased exposure from remote workers. Um, with COVID and all the changes that we went from work from home, there's been a big push to kind of allow people to work from home, which I am a big proponent of, because I think there is ways to do all this, but it does increase your exposure. It comes down to how are your employees working remotely and what are they working on? How are they connecting to your network? Are they on a Starbucks Wi-Fi connection, or did they just walk and pull over to the side of the road and connect to the first free Wi-Fi that they find, right? So there's a lot of exposure that can come from this. And if they're using their personal devices again, how are we ensuring that their personal devices are actually properly secured and maintained? There's a huge level of cost that can come from a lot of this, and so that's something you have to take into consideration. Um, but it can be done and can be managed. The last one is insider risk and employee negligence. This kind of pairs with that last one is we often think the attackers on the outside look trying to get in, and that's not always the case. Sometimes the attacker can be on the inside, whether that's through malice, someone trying to look to do harm, or it's through negligence. Someone goes to email a client a sensitive piece of data that's not properly locked down, but instead of typing the right David, they type a different David, and now they just expose themselves and that other client to someone else that's out there, or having access to both Microsoft and their personal Gmail, and not thinking properly. One day they send out an email or communication through their Gmail account, which doesn't have all the same restrictions that their company Microsoft account would have. And so employee negligence is a thing that is on the rise. It's not necessarily something you can solve, but there are things that policies and procedures and even tools you can put in place to help prevent and also catch if something like that were to happen. So how do you protect your own attack surface area, right? This is the biggest thing. It's a cycle. It has to be done with every aspect of your business. It has to be done with every asset of your business, and it has to be done regularly. And that's for you to determine as a business what is the regular assessment need to be done. Is it annual? If is it 6 months? Is it every 5 years, right? And to some degree, your assets will determine how often you need to look at that. Patching for a workstation that needs to be done every month, right? But updates of a firewall every quarter, right? Because firewall patches come out seldom. If it's a vendor software, maybe it's annual because you have a contract with them, so there's nothing you can do with that. So you have to keep this going, but it is a cycle. The first thing you got to do is within that little realm, you got to define all your assets. And that includes shadow IT, which is sometimes the hardest. What are all the things that you're allowing that you don't want to allow? What are all the things that are not being blocked by your system? Again, that example, if we're talking insider risk, is does someone have access on their computer to both of their email accounts? How easy it for them is to then send information off personally through that, right? Shadow IT is a big one, but it is something that is you really have to take a look and a focus on. You got to evaluate the vulnerabilities and risks. Again, like I said, there's no such thing as a perfectly clean surface. There's no such thing as full privacy, especially if you have a business and you're online. There is going to be some exposure somewhere within your company. But as you identify assets, as you're looking at all of these things, you will start looking at what would be essentially the value if that system or that product or that asset goes down. Some of these things will be extremely high. Your core server that's operating all of your code, all of your functionality, all of your images, your database, if that goes down, maybe that's $250,000 a day that you're lost. You got to protect that first and foremost above all things. Versus maybe it's again, maybe email is just communication for you guys and no file sharing. And so, at that point, there's maybe some reputation loss, maybe a little bit of embarrassment if someone's email gets hacked. But the actual damage that can be done to your company has been limited to such a lowness that the value or the vulnerability and risk associated with that is much lower. And so after you do that, then you need to focus on the highest priority first, right? You have to assess and say, okay, well, I have exposure everywhere within my business, but these areas are going to cost or do the least amount of damage. And so we will get to these to fix them, but first we have to focus on these higher priorities first and make sure that we have a discovery around all of those and a way to identify all of the things that can go wrong there. And then even some of these lower risks, there are certain situations where you're like, this system brings in $100,000 a month, and if something damages to it, we're going to lose $1,000 or whatever that is. Like you start comparing the ROI on it, and at that point you accept risk, right? To fix it will cost you $50,000, but the damage will only be 5,000 if it actually happens, and the risk that actualization of it happening is pretty low. So you got to start thinking about prioritization of all these things. Once you have that figured out, then you go through, you implement, patch, configure, secure, whatever you need to do. If that's done through tools or it's just done through manual work, but adding the level of security that you need to do for your company is really big at that point. And then the continuous monitoring. We here at Velox, we use several different systems to tie in, especially cloud-based solutions, things that normally don't have their own monitoring system, things like Microsoft, Google Workspace, um, SharePoint. We have AVDs or for like your Windows AVD environments, things like that. They all tie into our centralized platform that we can monitor and that we can protect. And so while we then patch and secure everything, we keep that going with these tools that help us. Anytime something changes, we go, okay, why did that change? How do we change it back? Things like that, especially for things like MFA. We don't want users going off of that on by accident or on purpose. So we keep it on that. So I'm going to speed through these a little bit just so we can keep up with time. I want to be respectful for everyone who has to get out of here by 10 o'clock, but just some couple of real life examples. So if some of you may have heard of these, some of you these might be new, but back in 2019, right, Capital One actually had a data breach. So this was a misconfiguration on a web server, right? Someone didn't have the right protection put on their firewall and they left it open. And what this did is this allowed the attacker to find that weakness, get in through that misconfiguration, and then allow them to gain access, essentially move laterally throughout the entire system. So this is as simple as an attack surface where a box was not checked properly or a input was not selected properly, and that allowed for a complete compromise. Right. The result of this, credit card applications going back as far as 2005, that's 14 years, were stolen from 100 million people, um, compromising a ton of U.S. citizens. Right. SolarWinds. This is probably a company many of you not heard of, but in the IT world, this was a big one that we heard of back in 2020, where the attackers are actually able to insert malicious code directly into the SolarWinds Orion software. So that what that meant is then basically once the software updated and pushed out to every agent that was installed on every computer, every antivirus software out there said, "Hey, this is actually good because it was came from the vendor itself. They were the injection point into all of these different businesses." And AV said, "Yeah, the vendor signed it. We're clear." But ultimately, what it did is it started running a massive amounts of malicious code, stealing data, locking out systems, throwing out ransomware, and it hit thousands and thousands of organizations. Many of us heard about this and probably were affected by it, considering just the mass numbers of it. But the Equifax data breach back in 2017. So this was them not patching their systems, and ultimately it was a software system called Apache that was not patched, which exposed their database. But didn't just stop there. Ultimately, what we found, while that was the entry point into it, because almost most of their systems were unpatched or not taken care of, that it existed several vulnerabilities. And so as the person got in there, they were able to move around undetected, exfiltrate data encryptedly undetected, and do everything. And it all came down to just keeping things up to date. The result, as many of us know, right? Hundreds of millions of people had their identity stolen, more than 40% of the US population. Basically, Equifax being one of the largest credit retailers out there, they had everything. And they sent out, there was a really big problem that happened. Last one I want to show, and kind of just the range of different types of attack searches. So Marriott data breach. So what happened? So back in 2014 or 2018, Marriott actually acquired the Starwood Hotel brand. They paid $12.2 billion for this, and this is important. They spent a lot of money on this company to bring in a bunch of other hotels with it to their system. The problem though is when they were doing this, that the systems were not properly vetted. So Starwood actually had a breach, and the breach had been sitting there for over 4 years. It's not really clear how that breach happened, but the point is someone was in the system. When they joined and they came together and Marriott adopted their systems into theirs, essentially this malicious actor now had a whole new set of databases that they got to work through. And with that, they were able to go through and attack the Marriott company itself, and which ultimately led to 500 million people had their data stolen. It was a huge amount in the US, but it was international, right? And so they inherited that risk because it wasn't properly vetted out, right? That's an adoption into your attack service that you have to take care of. And at the time, it was the second largest breach. So best practices: implement a zero trust architecture, deny first, allow by exception, do regular pen testing. You say your systems are fine, test it, make sure it's true. You got to make sure everything's up to date. The easiest thing to do is patches, and it's often the most overlooked. Employee cybersecurity awareness is huge. They have to know what's right, what's wrong, what to do, what's allowed, what's not allowed, how people can get in your business, right? And secure your third party integrations as much as possible. I understand that's outside of your control, but everywhere that you can think, we need to try, right? So some final takeaways again, know your assets. You got to know all the things that are involved in your business. Start making a list. Figure out how to manage your shadow IT, how to keep people away from sites in places that they shouldn't be on. You got to prioritize high risk vulnerabilities, the things that are the easiest and hardest to take care of. Take care of those first. Continue the continuous monitoring. This is a cycle. It doesn't get better and stay better. You have to your business is going to evolve. It's going to change. Technique IT is going to change in the process. You got to stay with that. And the biggest thing is to invest in tools and employee training. This stuff does not get solved overnight. It does not get solved easily. It takes time, but these are the things that are going to keep you moving in your business, in your company, and producing revenue and profit and keep you around for a long time. It's no longer big corporations that are getting hit. It's any business because of the so much risk and so much high potential for a big payout for these type of attackers. So that proactive management is going to reduce all of your cyber risk. So I realize we're a little short on time, a little rough on it, but if there are questions, I'd love to hear from you guys. I'm here to stay around. I understand some of you have to jump a little early, but yeah, if anybody has any questions, feel free to unmute or throw them out in the chat. Pull it up here. All right. Some of the things that I commonly get asked for is how to protect, especially those remote users or the users that are constantly moving in and out of the office and keeping their network secure. A lot of people like to turn to the advertised VPN usage that's out there, the Nord and the Express, and I think Shark is one of them now, and to keep your data safe. And sure, those places may encrypt your data, but ultimately, what that comes down to is you don't know exactly how they're encrypting your data. It's also not centrally managed by your company. So again, we were talking about third-party vectors. Um, you don't want the risk to be tackled by somebody that's out of your control. You want to bring that in-house. And there's plenty of solutions for people who are traveling and people who are not in the office all the time that you can get them on protected networks, right? They're called zero trust network access. VLX Systems has one that we use for all of our clients. And if that's something that you have a question about, we'd love to hear it. And then the shadow IT, the deny all, allow by exception is probably one of the hardest things to do. There's some cool tools that can help. We certainly have worked hard to kind of invest in those tools so that we can learn them out. But those are the things that are going to really kind of keep you and your business safe to make sure people can't do whatever they want to do, whether on purpose or by accident. Most of the time, it's by accident. Perfect. Well, as we're kind of wrapping up today's session, if you guys have any other questions outside of this, or you just want to talk a little bit more about what this all means, feel free to reach out to me. My email is anthony@vloxsystems.net. You can certainly reach me there. Christine has also put in our chat here. We are doing a cybersecurity conference/workshop later on this year in March, where we're going to be talking a little bit more deep dive into some of this stuff, really kind of looking at the social aspect of cybersecurity and how we always say users are the weakest link, but we want to figure out how to protect that and how damaging it could really be if that's exploited. So how to bring some training and some insight into that stuff. So she posted a link. Feel free to sign up for that. I'm super excited about that event as well. It'll be a little bit longer and more time for kind of questions and one-on-one time. So awesome. Well, with that said, it's 10 o'clock. I want to be respectful of everyone's time. So I appreciate you guys all coming and stopping by. And yeah, hope you have a great rest of your day. And we'll see you guys next month.